Kia ora. Talofa, Ula, Ni Hao, and Salam Alaikum. Enamana, Naho, Efa, Tenakoto, Katoa. Naumai, Harimai. Ekoana, Tenako. Ko, Taimai, Koto. Ki te whakanui I te kaupapa e te rā. Norera e eko rangatira. Tenakoto, 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 Katoa. To the esteem of the four winds, I acknowledge you. Welcome, welcome. I am joyful that you have arrived to support this event, and on that note, my esteemed colleagues, I greet you, I greet you, I greet you all. Welcome to Professor Rowe's Professorial Lecture. A very special welcome to Nick's family, who have indeed used the four winds supply from Australia and Ellerslie to share in this celebration. My name is Ralph, and I'm HOV Dance Studies, and it's my pleasure to be your host tonight and to introduce Professor Nicholas Rowe. After Nick's professorial lecture, I invite you to stay, chat, eat and drink, and wrestle from Nicholas any story that includes snakes, motorbikes, war zones, and border crossings. I have known Nick for nearly 20 years. Meeting at a community dance conference in Lisbon in Portugal in 2003, our first conversation, like so many, cut to the point. Hi, my name's Nick. I live in Ramallah, Palestine. I desperately want to swim in the ocean. What are you doing after? I replied, I think a swim in the freezing Atlantic around midnight would be great. We swam, we talked, we became great friends with a deep shared interest in the power of dance in activating people and communities. Presently, Nick is the world's first UNESCO chair on dance. This accolade recognises his world-leading expertise in dance and social inclusion. For the last 30 years, Nick has investigated and facilitated social interdependence and creativity amongst people experiencing alienation, acculturation, marginalisation within culturally complex contexts such as refugee camps, urban slums, disaster zones, and probably the most complex, tertiary education. This valuing of dance's inherent qualities has led Nick to focus on collaboration within teaching and research. Nick's work expands our understandings of what enhances and inhibits collaboration, how collective problem solving occurs within challenging real-world scenarios, and how collaboration and dance can foster wider inclusion in our societies. As we see what is happening around the world right now, we can truly appreciate the importance of Nick's research. Nick's world-leading research and practice focusing on collaboration, inclusion, and problem solving may come as a complete surprise to his family. But trust me, Gaffer and Summer, it's true. Nick has published 5 books, many research articles, and given over 100 public talks and keynotes that attest to his leadership and expertise. However, it's not just what Nick knows, it's about how he helps others to learn, to research, to dance. He has a sparkle in his eyes and an energy that can change people's lives. As Professor Rose Martin, Nick's first PhD student, commented, sailing in treacherous seas in Bodrum, the great escape by horse and carriage in Luxor, toboggan shopping in Helsinki. What adventures we have had. But there is one moment where you completely changed my life. Beirut, November 2009. After a long jet-lag day teaching in Burj El Baridjene refugee camp, we walked around the Corniche. You said something like, come on, of course we can change the world, and we have to leave it better than when we started. Since that moment, my life has never been the same, in the absolute best possible way. You are brilliant, a scholarly rock star, my academic ride or die, a dear friend, one of the most wonderful humans I know. Congratulations, Professor Rowe. Rose is now Head of Arts Education at NTM University in Norway. She sent her love. Hi, Rose. Before evolving into a dance academic, Nick was a professional dancer, choreographer and artistic director. As a professional ballet and contemporary dancer, Nick was able to connect with worldwide networks and engage with dancers, especially in Palestine, who, like him, were hungry to research the role and function of dance in society. Another past student of Nick's was Dr. David Zeitner, who is lecturing in Singapore. David sends this message. First, I want to send my congratulations to you, Nick, for this fantastic achievement. Your experience and ability to see dance from so many different perspectives in terms of where dance may sit in diverse cultures, education, politics, and the craft itself was eye-opening after my career as a professional dancer. Sometimes it took some chocolate muffins to get you to open up. But anyway, thank you for your support and for helping me to see and discover dance anew. Nick has worked around the world, but more recently, he's focused on the dance in the Pacific. Sachiko Soro from Fiji sends her greetings. Nick has stretched my brain in ways I did not know was possible. The amount of aha moments I had on my dissertation journey with Nick as my supervisor was like popping popcorn. I'm so grateful for his wisdom and mentorship. He came several times to Fiji to work with our dance company and has had a profound effect on how they think and move. He has even inspired more Indigenous dance practitioners from Fiji to undertake academic study in dance. Nick, a consistent message is that your work is making an impact. Most recently, when I asked Jazz Ofawani, one of your current PhD students, how you have influenced her education journey, Jazz replied, "The longevity and enjoyment of my postgraduate research journey is a tribute to the meaningful working relationships that Nick nurtures and invests energy in. As my main supervisor for the past 6 years, Nick's approach to supervision has challenged me to think and write critically, whilst feeling as though my ideas are valuable contributions. I am sincerely grateful for his devotion of time and encouragement towards upskilling opportunities and an undoubted belief in me, which has fueled my motivation to continue. Nick's mentorship and friendship is a connection I'll always value." Nick, these comments are just a few of the many, and they only glance at the impact that you and your work is having in New Zealand and around the world, not least in Palestine. You are a fierce advocate for dance research, a fierce advocate for justice, and a loving and advocate for family and community. Nick, it is my pleasure to stand beside you, and my pleasure to now invite you to give your professorial lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you. Thank you, Ralph. Used up pretty much all of my material. I've got about 5 minutes left here. That's what I'm going to go through. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Nicholas Rowe tokuinga. No Ngāti Poro oku tupuna. E waka e ke noa. Whadalia jana. Ani ismi Nicholas, uana min Australia, bas mariti min Philistine, min Dara Fiji. One day Bintin min Philistine command Samo Yefa. Now, honestly, to be honest, I'm very bad at languages, but I absolutely love words. With languages, I trip on tenses, I slip on genders, I conjugate at inappropriate times. I tend to coagulate sentences rather than construct them. I adore words, though, and absolutely love learning new ones every day, regardless of the language. And I've got some favourites. One of my most favourite words is mishmakul. It translates from Arabic as inconceivable, and it's a common phrase used in many different ways. Mishmakul is a declaration. Mishmakul is a reflection. Mishmakul is a challenge. Mishmakul is a question. Mishmakul stands at the threshold of what can be understood. This boundary of conceivability is expressed in confusion, in wonder, in exasperation, in anger, in passion. What can't we conceive of? At the Occupy Wall Street protests, critical theorist Slavoj Zizek said, "We can imagine the end of the world, but we can't imagine the end of capitalism." I really love this phrase because it teasingly points out the edges of our conceptual boundaries. Regardless of one's politics, capitalist realism is a great provocation because it suggests some concepts appear so immutable, their everlastingness can even appear to transcend the collapse of the planet. So I'm going to talk about the end of the world today and how we can all get through it together. He waka ake noa. We are all in the same canoe, and it is on a long, long journey. Before talking about that, though, I'd really like to express my thanks and welcome to you all. I'm deeply honoured by your presence tonight. Welcome to my friends and family, Maysun, my wife, my daughters Sama and Yafa. I'm so proud of you all. Welcome also to those that have travelled from across the sea, my brother Christopher, Duncan, my mother, Your Honour, my very patient mother. You have waited decades for this chance for me to give you a nice long lecture. Tonight really is your lucky night. So you have a free pass to heckle if you want, just you. So, Mishmichael, welcome to my colleagues. Dance Studies, what an amazing department to call home. Talk about a sticky campus. I mean, Ralph, you have created a place where people dream, where people interact, where people just want to hang out. Forget the university, let's all go open a chain of cafes. Welcome to the colleagues and collaborators from other disciplines. I come out of so many conversations with you, armed with new words, different perspectives, and inspired by the depth of thought that has gone into such diverse areas of human endeavour. Now, while universities were originally designed in cloistered silos by clusters of introverted, sadomasochistic, power-hungry monks, increasingly we are disassembling this model and finding opportunities to collaborate in research, teaching, supervision, and institutional initiatives. The university presents us with this incredible intellectual feast, a rare chance to deeply interact across diverse ways of knowing and being. So I don't really understand those who are insistent on defending their right to close their office door, write up their brilliant thoughts in private, and never talk to anyone else. I mean, aside from the money and prestige, why come to a university? It's like going to a smorgasbord and sitting in the corner with a packed lunch. So thank you to those colleagues from across disciplines for patiently explaining and generously listening. Welcome also to my students. I've been very fortunate in my time here to supervise 23 PhD and 32 master's theses. Now, I'm not going to name any here because I don't want to look like I play favourites there, but I can confidently say that every one of these supervisory dialogues and theses has extended my understandings of dance and the world. To misquote Isaac Newton, if I have seen further, it is because I have stood on the shoulders of my students. I would also like to welcome friends from the wider community, particularly the Palestine Solidarity Network Aotearoa, and all of those activists who are addressing the human-made problem of forced migration. You are ensuring that homeless people and stateless people are not less as people. You have maintained action day in, day out for years. Without your activism, all the research and theorising that we do in this institution has no meaningful value. And it is your actions that have led me into today's speech. So. As you might know, this speech has been delayed several times because of COVID. When I first received notification of the professorial promotion and the ensuing inaugural lecture, we were still in our first year of COVID. I sort of knew then that it would be some time before we could all get together and share in this as a public event, but I nevertheless needed to come up with a title, so I thought I'd better get something with a bit of shelf life. Inevitably, the end of the world is a perennial favourite. It has been around since biblical times. The end of the world carried us through the Dark Ages and the medieval period. Thanks to the viral growth of evangelism in the last couple of centuries and the improvement of computer-generated images in Hollywood in the last few decades, the end of the world has enjoyed a real resurgence. More recently, of course, quantitative researchers have hijacked the concept, setting up their doomsday clock. And in their typically reductive way, they've posited we only have 100 seconds left until midnight. But I think that qualitative and creative practice researchers still have something to offer to the end of the world. So tonight I'm going to bring dance into that discourse. First of all, we need to be clear what we mean by the end of the world as a concept in human consciousness. Now, I remember a conversation with my eldest daughter, Sama, many years ago on a car journey after one of her rare periods of silence. She emerged from her reflections and declared to us all, "I hope that I die from an asteroid hitting the Earth so that you don't have to mourn me." It's always been very thoughtful in that way. It does make us question, though, what the end of the world really is in our imagination. Because the complete destruction of the planet is something a bit less ominous than the end of the world. In our imagination, the complete destruction of the planet is really just the same as death, and as Sama suggested, can come as something of a reprieve. The end of the world inevitably carries a sense that the actual planet continues to exist in time and space, and possibly even we do. But that which has made it meaningful to us has come to an end. Now, whether the world is overrun by zombies or aliens, colonists or capitalists, whether the landscapes have become desert or flooded or overrun by jungle, whether our technologies have ceased to exist or taken control, the end of the world is a time when our sense of continuity in the world comes to an end. The world ends when we can make no meaningful association between what came before and what exists now. We do not feel belonging, and we do not feel we are growing. Our own sense of becoming within the world has ceased. Instead of a place for becoming, the world is only a place of has been. This overwhelming ending can be a very real sensation for people who are subject to forced migration. Refugees, asylum seekers, internally displaced people can all experience what Erickson described as a collective trauma, a trauma to the very fabric that holds a community together. Their worlds are just crumbling away. The current scale and urgency of forced migration is unprecedented. Currently, roughly 80 million people around the world have been forcibly displaced. That is 1 in every 110 people on the planet, and it is increasing. Every 2 seconds, another person is forcibly displaced by political conflict, environmental disaster, or the collapse of sustenance. That means that by the end of my speech today, another 1,200 people will be set upon the road. For these people, the world that was meaningful has come to an end. Families are split up, friendships are lost, careers are ended, communities are pulled apart, landscapes are disappeared, histories are disassociated from the present. Local knowledge is no longer useful. The world has become an abyss. In this sense, the world does not end, in the words of T.S. Eliot, with a bang or a whimper. The end actually sounds like the incremental pitter-patter of millions of small endings, like static. And this static is destined to become much louder as forced migration is certain to rise much further. As a result of natural, economic and political disasters around the world associated with climate change, the UN estimates that by the year 2050 there will be up to 1 billion climate refugees globally, or 1 in every 9 persons. Humanity has, of course, experienced migration before, sometimes by choice and sometimes by force, and human cultures have remained remarkably resilient. We have spent millennia constructing our worlds in new environments. The world has ended many times and we have recreated it many times. We have never, however, had to face the scale or speed of this destruction. We have also never had to accept that no matter where we go, there will be many others there undergoing the same endings. And for all of that, the place that we have left has gone forever. So for this reason, we urgently need to understand processes of creativity. When the world meaningfully ends, how do we recreate a meaningful world? What skills and dispositions do people require in order to undertake this process en masse? How can we ensure that everyone has the tools to adjust from a sense of has-been to a sense of becoming? In this sense, a creative disposition is at the core of resilience. And that's where dance comes into the picture. Today I'm going to talk to you about my research into dance and creativity with a focus on collective trauma. I will talk about the ethics of creativity in a world that is ending and consider concepts like democratizing creativity, humanizing creativity, and post-humanizing creativity. But I'm not going to go straight into this theoretical terrain, however. I love theory and have profited well from producing it. But my realizations associated with the ethics of creativity emerged long before I read or wrote any articles on it. It began in my practice as a creator. Before entering academia, I was a dance practitioner. I spent 20 years in different forms of dance practice. As a dance performer, a choreographer, a dance teacher, a dance administrator, a dance critic, an artistic director, a community animateur. And I've kept up a practice as a community animateur and a dance filmmaker since joining academia. And through these years of practice, I've experienced many mishmakul moments. Moments when I stood on a threshold, questioning my assumptions about dance and creativity. So I'm going to discuss that process of realization rather than dwell on the outcomes of my research, my academic research. My profile is on the website, and the articles, books and films that my research has produced are all accessible online. Instead, by reflecting on these very tangible epiphany moments, I can probably better explain to you why the ethics of creativity is such a major force in my research activities, and why dance and creativity matter at the end of the world. So, let's go off to Helsinki, Finland, in January 1992. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was performing with the Finnish National Ballet in the Old Alexander Theatre in a matinee performance of Giselle. Now, this is a moment that I have reflected on before, and a story that I've told before. But its profound impact on my life has meant that I've returned to it again and again to try to fathom it. It was in the middle of the first act. I was a happy little peasant, clasping the hands of my happy peasant wife, skimming across the stage. Chassé par le bourré, glissade assemblée. Chassé par le bourré, glissade assemblée. Not my favourite words now, but they once were. My happy peasant wife, smiling at me, I was smiling at her, and we were both smiling at the prince across the stage. The prince was seated on a stool by the tavern, watching us and all the other peasants, smiling and patiently waiting for his chance to get up and dance the way that princes dance. We were also all smiling at the audience, and we could see in the front few rows, all smiling back at us. And I suddenly thought, what on earth am I doing with my life? This is so ridiculous. And it was in that moment that I decided to quit being a ballet dancer. Mishmakul. Suddenly, this mountain I'd been climbing so assiduously, the one I was halfway up, ceased to have any value. I smiled over at the prince, who I'd so longed to become, and one day in the not-so-distant future would become. And I felt this great sense of revulsion. I couldn't really articulate it at the time, but I felt like I'd been smeared in sameness. It was only years later, when I was reading Hannah Arendt, that I started to understand what I had felt. Arendt talks about a citizenship of strangeness and argues for the importance of making strangeness visible and maintaining strangeness in the public domain. I started to understand why I had experienced some insidious sense of wrongdoing there inside the Alexander Theatre that Saturday matinee. I was glorifying a sameness that none of us could fully achieve or sustain. So I finished that performance of Giselle, finished the season and the contract with the Finnish National Ballet, bought a motorcycle and went for a long ride across Europe and Africa. I knew that I still loved dancing. I still loved the feel of my body moving through space and interacting with other moving bodies. I still loved all of the creative possibilities that moving bodies could achieve. But I just wanted to immerse myself in strangeness, to wash off that gilded stain of ballet. I actually went on seasonally to perform ballet for a couple more years in different companies around the world to earn money to fund me to travel and try to experience more different. And it was through those travels that I came to value the humanizing of creativity. So, 2 years later, it's Easter, the day before Good Friday, and I'm in a squatters camp on the outskirts of Manila. I'm in the Philippines on an Australia Council grant to work with Ballet Philippines, but I've met up with a Marxist theatre organisation that works on through the Catholic Church every year with communities that are living on and off the rubbish tips around Manila. Each year this group works with local communities on a performance of the Calvary of Christ, which they call the Calvario of the urban poor, and it winds through the streets of the squatters camp. This year they've invited me to work with the community to choreograph the performance. And so I've spent the last 2 weeks workshopping for 4 hours every evening with children and adults of the camp, co-creating stories and dances that relate to each of the 14 stations of the cross. They have brought items that they have found in the tip, and this has been a starting point for our movement experimentation. An old piece of tarpaulin is stretched taut by all of the dancers to make the table of the Last Supper that they move through, in and around. Some poles are lashed together to make a crucifix that they can lean into and pull away from. Their movements are not radically inventive, but they are in a way quite personal, and I am in awe of their sense of energy and enthusiasm to engage in our creative process. These adults and children spend their days trawling through rubbish to find things to sell, and then wind through the traffic in the streets of Manila to hawk these items. And yet every evening for 2 weeks, about 30 of them come to the workshop and we make up dances together. It's only in the last couple of years that I've learnt a word that best captures that feeling. Mafana, a Tongan Samoan word that talks about how a space is energized by an animated hum, a hum that everybody contributes to and feeds off. And so it's Maundy Thursday, the evening before the Good Friday show. The director of the Marxist Theatre Organisation has come with some of the others from the theatre group to see a preview. They watch it all, and then there is silence. He shakes his head and wags his finger. No. These dancers do not look like they are suffering. Every year we put on this show and invite media to come and see how the urban poor are suffering. But these ones look they are having a good time. I had clearly misread the brief. So he summoned some other members of his organisation and had them teach a simple but expressive pattern of movements. The sequence that they teach the group slowly transitions between a series of tortured and agonised postures. The Calvario we had all created was shelved along with the sets and the props gathered from the rubbish. The dancers are instead directed to repeat this phrase at each of the stations of the cross, while a speech is presented over loudspeakers expressing the suffering of the urban poor. Mishmaku. Now, while I appreciated the aims of the theatre group and their desire to bring visibility to a compelling social issue, I was less appreciative of the process that they choose to bring that visibility. At that moment, on Maundy Thursday, 1994, I was open to an appreciation of the ethics of creativity. I was awoken to the politics of how creativity happens, where creativity happens, and through whom creativity happens. Many years later, I would read theories about humanising creativity, which requires what Banerjee and Byrne describe as an anti-elitist conceptualisation of creativity. This understanding of creativity is associated with everyday activities of all human beings and transcends economic or cultural value of the product that's created. As Anna Kraft and Kerry Chappell explain, when people are engaged in such creative activity, they are both making and being made. Those involved in creativity are on a journey of becoming, developing their identities as they develop creative ideas. When we engage in creative actions, we allow change to happen to us. It is this experience of creation that disposes us to change. Creative experiences make us feel curious about change. Creative activities therefore grow intrinsic motivation to want to continually learn new skills and gain new knowledge, to construct new beginnings. Creativity and creative activity keeps us in a state of becoming. And this state of becoming allows us to adapt and survive within a very rapidly changing world. Unfortunately, it is often the people that are experiencing change the fastest that are provided with the least opportunities to engage in creative actions. So this was a different sort of injustice that I had sensed on Maundy Thursday, 1994. It emphasised for me why we so urgently need to democratise creativity. The democratisation of creativity is as essential as the democratisation of education, the democratisation of economic mobility, and the democratisation of policy making. This democratisation means that everybody, everywhere, should have access to experiences of creativity. Now, this has been suggested in numerous UN and UNESCO policies, from the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights to the 2011 Seoul Agenda for Arts Education. At this point, though, it's important to distinguish between creative activity and activities in the arts. The words art and creativity are often used interchangeably, so that we can feel that if we are engaged in one, the other is inevitably also happening. But this is not necessarily the case. And it's possible to engage in an arts activity, like a technique class in ballet, and not experience any creativity. It's also possible to engage in very diverse, non-artistic activities, such as pruning, or pickling, or policy writing, and do it in a way that allows us an experience of creativity. So while the arts can be a very effective means of experiencing creativity, activities associated with the arts do not always provide this experience. In many places, curricula for the arts remain focused on teaching and assessing a student's competence in particular techniques associated with particular art forms. In other places, an emphasis on the sacred value of intangible cultural heritage positions learners as vessels responsible for preserving the authenticity of particular cultural items. Now, others may argue for the value of such pedagogic actions, but they should not be confused with experiences of creativity. We should therefore not assume that simply because the world is democratizing the arts, it is also democratizing creativity. The world still has a long way to go to ensure that all people, at all stages of their lives, have access to experiences of being creative. This is even more significant in places where access to creative experience is deliberately restricted by regimes that effectively maintain power by portraying certain peoples as intransigent, backward, and uncreative. So, let's jump forward 6 years to Ramallah in the occupied Palestinian territories. It is early in the year 2001, about 6 months into the Second Intifada, and I had moved to the West Bank about a year ago. My arrival into the West Bank was at the end of what has become known as the Oslo period. I was working with several local community-based arts organisations, El Fanoun, Sarit, Ramallah, and the Popular Arts Centre. It had felt like an exciting period of creative possibility, and we were in the process of devising several new dance productions and running dance workshops for the public. While the Israeli military continued to dominate most aspects of civil life for Palestinians with acts of violent repression, the opportunities for Palestinian people to engage in artistic expression and exchange had grown. Then the Israeli government had another election looming, and the need for Israeli leaders to evidence their brutality resurfaced in September. Now, to gain a sense of the scale and impact of the Israeli military violence at that time on the communities of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, consider the following. Within the first 6 weeks of the Second Intifada, more Palestinian children and adults were killed and wounded inside the West Bank and Gaza Strip by Israeli settlers and the Israeli military than the entire number of American soldiers killed and wounded in the whole of the American war in Vietnam. The suddenness of the violence was shocking. It was completely disproportionate to the actions of Palestinian militants and suffering experienced by Israelis, and it disassembled communities across the West Bank. For many families, the world had come to an end, and not for the first time in their lives. Within the Popular Arts Centre, we had lengthy discussions about what we should do. the local Palestinian artistic community had suspended performances and arts activities, all out of solidarity with those that had died. And yet now, more than ever, people, and particularly children, needed activities to support their resilience and inspire regeneration. So we started the Our Kids project. During the next 5 years, the Our Kids project would take 14,000 hours of creative arts activities to more than 11,000 children, all across the cities, villages and refugee camps of the West Bank, Gaza Strip and South Lebanon. This then led on to the Our Kids Teachers program, which provided training in how to facilitate arts activities. This was delivered to 900 youth leaders and activists and teachers in camps in villages across the West Bank, Gaza Strip and South Lebanon, so that creative activities could be more self-sustaining in each place. It was in early 2001, however, when I realized how important it was to not just engage in creative activity, but to also be able to rationalize the significance of engaging in creative activity. Raising funds to sustain these dance, music and drama and arts teachers and activities had brought me into the world of cultural diplomacy through meetings with international aid agencies and embassies. Now, I remember a cultural attaché at one of the embassies asking me the following question, hoping for a comment for his internal report. Do you think the dance workshops have stopped any of the kids from doing a suicide bombing? Now, the attaché's question illustrated how Palestinian children and the function of dance and creativity was valued in his imagination. As a question, it confronted and angered me. All of our creative arts workshops in refugee camps were not being done simply to keep the people on the other side of the wall feeling safer. At the time, I just gave a diplomatic response. After all, the Our Kids program needed the money to keep functioning. The question did push me to think further, however, about how we rationalise the value of these creative arts activities amongst both the people involved and to the funding stakeholders, like the cultural attaché. I wish I could have taken him there. Like the squatters' camp in Manila, the Palestinian refugee camps are very confronting locations. Narrow, crumbling alleyways, overflowing sewers, houses built on top of houses, webs of electrical wires spanning the sky between buildings, and generations of families trying to maintain dignity. In the arts workshops, I was humbled by the way the children would arrive in their best clothes, as families sought to take pride in themselves and provide chances for any enriching experience for their children. Often the sheer scale of their need for creative activity was overwhelming, however. Each Friday we coordinated with a local school or organisation in a camp to go into the camp with 4 creative arts teachers, and the plan was we would run for 2 hours of concurrent workshops for about 100 children. Inevitably, way more than 200 children, 300 children would show up, eager to participate. We regularly ended up teaching 8 hours straight, preceded and followed by 2-hour bus journeys, mostly spent waiting at Israeli military checkpoints. In the camps, we pushed chairs and tables back in rough concrete schoolrooms, made some space in a courtyard, lay down painting materials under a tree. Now, while I had trained the workshop facilitators back at the Popular Arts Centre, my main job once I had got to the camps was to contain and support the spaces that the dance, music, drama and arts workshops were taking place in. This predominantly involved managing the kids who were waiting for their turn to participate in one of the workshops. I remember another epiphany moment at Akbat Jabba refugee camp, just outside Jericho near the Dead Sea, on a particularly hot and dusty afternoon. There was a troop of about 80 kids waiting for their turn to rotate into the classrooms, where all workshops were taking place. I was playing a large group game with them to keep them from bursting into the rooms and disrupting the workshops. There was one boy, he was about 13, who had arrived at the event pretty angry already, and he became more upset the longer he waited to join the workshops. I felt a bottle hit me in the back of the head. It was plastic, so it was not too hard. I turned to see this boy yelling at me, asking why he couldn't go in to join the workshop yet. I explained to him that it was just another 10 minutes and he could go in. Now, when the rotation came 10 minutes later, he went into the class that Mason was teaching. I made an eye roll at her to suggest good luck with this one, and went back to work with the other larger group again. About 25 minutes later, I had a chance to check in on each of the workshops groups, and I had another mishmackle moment. Here was this same boy who had been angry all morning, now dancing and laughing and teaching a movement to one of the other kids. He was transformed. Now, I hesitated to tell this story this evening because the last thing I want to do here is portray Palestinian kids in refugee camps as violent. They are not, and most of my experiences there involved interactions with generous, warm, and very humorous children. Similarly, I've experienced much more aggressive behaviour from children and adults all over the world, including from academic staff at this university. There's a few times I would have preferred the honesty of a plastic bottle to the head. But I wanted to share this moment because it so impressed on me the transformative impact of being involved in creative activity. It pushed me into the journey of rationalising the value of creative activity in such contexts, which led to my first book, Art During Siege. These experiences in the camps prompted me philosophically to move beyond humanising creativity as an ethic. One of the problems with the humanising ethic is its emphasis on the libertarian Cartesian concept of the individual and the ideal of individual emancipation. Yes, creativity can be a very beneficial way for supporting individuals towards self-actualization. Yes, it can also allow for creativity to be quickly entwined within neoliberal education and economic systems, which can economically rationalise the value of creativity. The libertarian and neoliberal model can effectively show how an individual's creative capacities can be easily commodified into a resource to support their private acquisition of wealth. This was not the reason why I was working with creativity in the refugee camps, however. Just as I was not teaching dance in refugee camps as a mechanism for distracting Palestinians from a legitimate political struggle, I was not teaching dance in refugee camps to save one soul at a time for capitalism. There needed to be a better ethical basis for creativity. And so this pushed me into historical and ethnographic research to examine creativity as a means of sustaining a sense of community. Karen Bond describes this as a form of communal creativity, which can emerge when groups of individuals heighten their interrelatedness through creativity. Kerry Chappell and Anna Kraft refer to this as wise humanising creativity, as it considers creative activity beyond the frame of an individual and in relation to broader social relationships. These theories argue that creating things together actually help us to value a sense of togetherness more. Simply put, the community that creates together stays together. Now that doesn't rhyme, so we'll probably never see it on a billboard for a church, but my research into community arts organisations around the world has evidenced the complex ways in which community creative arts, as a form of public pedagogy, are central to a community's resilience. Co-creation can allow communities to form and reform. Collaborative activities can dispose communities towards expanding their sense of inclusion, as creativity thrives on diversity and difference. Shared creative activities actively form new, shared meanings for those involved. And all of that meaning making renews the world again for those involved. So how can we effectively collaborate in this way? In the last 5 years, I've further expanded this research into tertiary education, critically examining the way that collaboration is taught within the ubiquitous group task dimension of every degree program. Now that's a real horror story that I do not want to have time to share today. But how we teach collaboration is an urgent issue. As a ticking doomsday clock reminds us, we don't have much time left. Suffice it to say, gaining a common understanding of what collaboration means, how it is enabled, and how we might dispose the next generation towards greater collaboration is the singular greatest challenge of higher education today. Instead of going down that rabbit hole, however, I'd like to conclude with a realization that moved me to a more post-human view of creativity. So, we are now in Burj-Barajni refugee camp in Beirut in late April 2009. I've been making a series of short dance films with a group of young people in that camp. We've been trying some ideas in the large dark hall that has been constructed as a cultural space. Our ideas are okay, but somewhat turgid. We decided to go and explore what we might create at different sites around the camp. Now, I'd done lots of site-specific work before, but this time there was a different energy. It might have been the confronting obstacles of the camp that made the dance such a challenge, but something happened that sparked these brilliant exchanges between the dancers and the alleyways of that camp. It felt as if the concrete was contributing. Perhaps it was. And so for the next 7 years, I engaged in a project that explored how our habitats can inform our creativity. This became the feature-length documentary film, Dancing 7 Cities. Dancing 7 Cities engaged very diverse people in creative embodied dialogues with the urban environments that they inhabit. In doing so, the film explored a post-human ethic for creativity. As Reza Braidotti explains, to be post-human does not mean to be dehumanized. Post-humanism simply argues that humans are not the only phenomenon capable of acting and responding. We therefore need to acknowledge that in any activity, that there are multiple and diverse humans and non-human actants. This recognition of the agency of non-human actants allows us to more deeply consider the experience of the whole environment, and not simply see how the environment serves our experiences as humans. To achieve this consideration of non-human actants, posthumanism further seeks to transcend the boundaries of what humanity is. Karen Braddard argues that this involves recognizing that things do not have inherently determinate boundaries. Is there a fixed boundary between your skin and the clothes you are wearing? Is there a fixed boundary between your feet and the ground you are dancing on? How might other ways of perceiving the world allow you to release the conceptualization of boundaries and experience a more fluid transfer between different phenomena? Karen Braddard therefore describes this process as interaction rather than interaction, to describe the ways that human and non-human actants engage in an activity. Through interaction, we are a greater whole connecting within itself, rather than separate individual humans reaching out and manipulating others and each other. We are enmeshed. We can never be truly disconnected from this greater whole, even though we might imagine ourselves as separate entities drifting through space. So what does this posthumanism ethics mean for a posthuman ethics of creativity? When put into practice, it means that we cannot think of creativity as something that just comes from an individual person. We cannot even think of creativity as something that just comes from an interaction between people. Creativity inevitably involves interactions between people and non-human phenomena in the environment. From a post-human perspective, these non-human actants need to be acknowledged as active in the creative process and not just passive objects that are acted upon. This further means that creativity is limited when we seek to do it just inside our heads and then direct other objects and people to follow us. When creativity is predetermined by human visions, it remains inherently limited to existing human perspectives. If we decenter the human from creativity, we become less interested in who is responsible for the creation and more interested in how the creative process actually happens. Posthuman creativity, therefore, treats the future as emergent rather than always to be designed. Posthumanism positions us well to consider how can we enable people and the planet to experience creativity and the transforming effect it can have. Advancing this post-human ethics of creativity within our practices, our education systems, our cultures and our economies might therefore be considered central to any endeavours that seek to sustain the world. In the making of Dancing 7 Cities, I should just mention that I worked with dancers in community dance organisations in Suva, Fiji, Darwin, Australia, Vientiane, Laos, Ramallah, Palestine, Beirut, Lebanon, Siena, Italy, and back full circle to Helsinki, Finland. While I gained so much from all of these interactions, within Helsinki especially, it felt like a chance to go back and reimagine what dancing in the world could be. So, thank you for coming tonight. I've really enjoyed being here. I've really, really enjoyed getting here. The world may be ending again and again. Don't look to the ground or the skies for damnation or salvation. Just get up and dance, and we'll create a new world, again and again. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
And I can't wait to ask you more questions about everything else you've done in your life, except all those wonderful things. And I'm not going to let you have questions now. We can have food and drink and have questions. But now's a great time to give you presents. See, we can just dance.